You resigned January 6, 21. Why?
Because I was very separate from the West Wing at that point because Mark Meadows and I were not in a good place. Um, but I had this feeling, and as I've said to people before many times, in the Trump White House, most things where people would be like, "Oh, this is bad," you really grew immune to that. So nothing ever surprised me. But the day before, the day leading up, I had a bad feeling, and it was nothing that anyone told me. It was just a feeling, I think, after being around them so much and different behaviors. And the next day it started, et cetera, et cetera. I watched it, and things started to happen, and I sent Mrs. Trump a text, and I said, "Hey, should you send a tweet out that says," I'm paraphrasing, but everybody has the right to protest peacefully, but there's no room for violence here. Please be peaceful or go home. Again, I'm paraphrasing. But it wasn't meant to be political at all. It was just like, please let's not become violent. And she wrote back the word no. And Mrs. Trump had always with me been very vocal, privately especially, but sometimes publicly, about things that were going on. And she never, ever had a problem speaking out or doing something, not against her husband, but against maybe some of his policies or things that were going on, let's say the border, going down to visit the children. And so when she just wrote back no, something in me just kind of turned off. And there had been a couple of things in the week or two previous that had been in my head, things she'd been saying, like, well, we don't know what's going on. Maybe we didn't lose. And that wasn't like her. And so I didn't know who had been in the residence or who had been talking to her. But she had always condemned violence. Like, she was the first in our whole administration or group to condemn Charlottesville. And so for her to just say no and not give me any explanation, that was very odd to me because she usually at least explained it. And I write this in my book. At that time, she was upstairs taking pictures of a new carpet that she had helped design and put in the White House. And watching what was happening on the TV, knowing what she was doing, and knowing she wouldn't put out even the most benign tweet just calling for peace. I had already been trying to resign for a few months. I've got the emails to prove that. She'd always talked me out of it. And that's just what was like the last straw. And which shouldn't have been the last straw, but that's just that. And so I would say 5-10 minutes later, I sent her an email and I resigned.
Well, you say in the book, you sent the text, do you want to tweet that peaceful protest are the right of every American, but there is no place for lawlessness and violence? And you got a one-word response, no. At that point, you said, okay, that's it. I'm out.
Yeah, because again, even when I would suggest things and she would tell me no, she always told me why. I mean, we always had a good banter, a good discussion, and I would be able to push back. But I also knew her well enough to know that if I got a no, that was no. And that just broke me because I know her, or I knew her, or I thought I knew her. And I thought, how can you be watching what's happening right now and not want to speak out? You're not speaking out against your husband. You're literally speaking for peace. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And again, I had been trying to resign for at least 3-4 months prior to that. So, yeah.
Did she talk to you about all of the Stormy Daniels allegations of her husband's infidelity and that sort of thing? What did she say about that, and how did she handle it?
So, yes, I had to be the person who called her to tell her that the first story was going to break about Stormy Daniels and payments and whatnot. And that was really difficult because at the time, I really did think of her as a friend. And as a woman who's been cheated on before anyway, I was feeling that, and I thought, my gosh, she's not only going to feel that, but it's going to be so public. And the details are going to be so public. And so I was very protective of her. looking back, she didn't need probably or want my protection, but I felt protective of her. And so I called her and told her. That first phone call, she was stoic. She was calm. I was in awe. I admired it. Over the next few months, as the stories came out, I got to see glimpses of her. She was clearly not happy, rightfully so. She did little things quietly to try to show her unhappiness. But as I wrote my book, I was in awe of the woman. She was stronger than I ever would have been, honestly.
What did she do quietly to show her unhappiness?
We had a State of the Union coming up, and she sent me a text saying she would like one of our military office aides to walk her through the Capitol because the floors were slippery. And at that point, I had seen this woman literally walk up hills in, where were we? Brussels, in heels, dirt hills where she actually broke the tip off her heel. The woman can walk anywhere in heels. She doesn't need anybody walking her. So I knew that was a little slight to him. She not only went separately to the State of the Union, she had a handsome young man walking her along. There was that. She didn't have me respond for the longest time in saying she supported her husband or whatnot. Yeah, we had a lot of just conversations, and she wasn't happy about it, but she kept telling me, Stephanie, that's his problem. That's his problem. He can deal with it. Why do I have to deal with it? And I was like, what? I wish I had that, I don't know, that quiet patience, or I don't know what it was. I admired it.
Did she feel that way the whole time, or did she ever finally say enough's enough and too much is too much?
She, of course, talked to me about how, trashy this woman was, or, Michael Avenatti was obviously really capitalizing off of it. So she would get mad in those regards. But no, her composure was always like, she never stopped saying to me, this is his problem. It's not my problem. And I always marveled at that. And I still do today, to be able to say, like, it's not me as a woman, because I, as you probably know, most women are like, what I do wrong, what's wrong with me? And women bend over backwards to try to change themselves or win their men back or whatever. She was like, this is him. I'm not going to deal with it. This is him. Great. He can deal with it. And I always respected that. I still do. In
talking about him, President Trump himself, you said his temper was terrifying, and it could be directed at anyone, whether he or she deserved it or not.
Yeah.
Say more about that. What do you mean?
Okay. I grew up with a stepfather who had a really horrible temper, and he was very abusive in many, many ways to me, which I won't go into. But as I've had time to reflect after my book, especially, I think for me personally, that is where that statement came from. This man, and I do write about this in the book, it was like a cycle of abuse, right? Like, you could walk in and he would literally be like, Stephanie, my beautiful Stephanie, you did amazing on TV today. And he would be so happy with you, and you would feel so good, and we would joke around. And then I remember when I think I was the first person maybe in the country to have perhaps gotten COVID, because it was with Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president who first came out with it, his press secretary, and I had just been with him at Mar-a-Lago. So I was quarantined for like 3 weeks, and I was really sick. And at one point, the president called me, and I answered and talked to him, of course. And he was like, oh, honey, you sound like shit. You need to stay home, take care of yourself, feel better. You sound awful. Da, 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 da. Fast forward 2 weeks, and I came back, but I was still trying to kind of keep my distance because he's such a germaphobe, but I did get summoned to the Oval. So I walked into the Oval. He was in his dining room, and I walked to the door, and he was like, stop, stop, stop. And he wouldn't let me come in any further, so I stood in the doorway. And we talked about whatever we talked about. And one of the White House lawyers gave him an answer he didn't like. And it just erupted. I mean, he was in a fine mood. And he didn't get an answer he liked. And so he erupted, as I said. And then he turned to me and can I curse on your show or no?
Sure.
Okay.
Say what was said.
Okay. He turned to me and he goes, and you, where the fuck have you been? You're my only PR person who's nowhere to be found. I didn't know who to call. I didn't know what to do. Where the fuck have you been? Which, number one, he had my phone number. Also, the White House switchboard did. And he called me. And he knew where I had been. And also, he wouldn't let me in the room, so he knew I was just potentially getting over COVID. And that was scary. His temper could be really, really scary. And I always hesitate saying that because I feel like I sound weak or like a weak woman or I don't know. But it wasn't a strong man talking to you. It was temper tantrums and it was scary. And it did make you or me, as someone who had been abused in my past, want to say yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And I wondered now, as I've had time to think and I've gone through a lot of therapy, did he choose people like that? Knowing that if he just showed that temper, everybody would say yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. Because, in a lot of the meetings I saw, no one pushed back. No one pushed back.